Welcome to the Stop Down Photography Podcast, Episode 7. I'm your host, Scott Davenport, and today's topic is the value and the danger of the familiar. Hi, everybody. Thanks for taking a few minutes of your day to spend with me on the podcast today. Something that's been bouncing around in my head the last week or so has been the familiar, shooting familiar places, shooting familiar subjects, and it stems from my passion for seascapes. I've had a sprained ankle for the last, it was a bunch of weeks, finally gotten over it and was able to get back out and start doing things again. And of course, I went to my familiar haunts, went to the coastline, got my fix of rocks and sand and ocean like I like to do. And it got me thinking about the value of familiar places, getting back into the groove of photography. But it also got me thinking about the dangers of it. So I wanted to talk about that today. Like I suspect most of you have, I have invested a lot of time and a lot of energy into my photography. I've got a passion for seascapes. That's what draws me back to the camera again and again. So I've poured a lot of myself into learning how to capture photos at the ocean. When I started, I struggled with my camera. I fumbled with dials, fumbled with buttons and menus, and was often missing shots because I couldn't get my settings configured quickly enough. And I'm a landscape photographer, and I wasn't having to deal with supremely dynamic situations, right? The trees, the rocks, the ocean, the mountains, they don't run away from the lens or move through the frame rapidly. And maybe the ocean a little bit, but for the most part, it's a pretty static situation. So I practiced some more. I got better with the camera. I got familiar with the camera. Composition grew over time, my skills there. I was in sponge mode. I absorbed and learned, and I got better. And the cycle continued, repeating behaviors, patterns, shooting locations, and I got better. Things became familiar. And I could talk about the post-processing side of this equation the same way. You try out a bunch of different tools, you settle on a couple, you get familiar with them, you know how they work, you know what to do in those tools to get the kind of look that you want, and your speed of post-processing becomes better. Things are smoother. You just sit down and it almost becomes second nature. Now, fast forward several years, the mechanics of photographing a seascape for me, in my example, it's low effort. I walk up to a scene near the ocean, a stretch of coast. I can read the scene easily. I have a pretty good instinct of what the ocean's doing. I know what camera settings I want. I pretty much know what filter I want to put on the camera, and I don't spend as much time figuring out the settings to capture each composition. I find the composition, and I've usually made the capture ocean cooperating in a few minutes. And then I can move on to another composition. So the familiarity is great because I can walk away with more photos, and the same efficiency gets applied in post-processing. For a seascape, I generally know the look I want. And what used to take a couple of hours is now, a 10 to 15 minute job at best, sometimes much less than that. It's my familiarity with the tools. My base photo is so much better, and it's just years and years of practice and repetition that built up this familiarity. So when you have a genre that you really like, it sounds great, right? Drop me on the beach with the camera. I'm at home. I'm comfortable. I'll capture some good photos. However, I do think that there is a dark side to familiarity. There's a danger that it can stifle your creativity or limit your vision, and occasionally it could squash inspiration if you're not aware of it, not keeping it in mind. For example, with my recent visits to the ocean in San Diego, I mentioned I had a sprained ankle. I got over that. It was nice to get out with the camera again. But when I was out in the field, sometimes I felt almost robotic. Walk up to the ocean, find a rock near the water's edge, Focal length 16 to 18 millimeter, f11, add 4 stops, get a half-second exposure, click, 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 move to the next. And I wasn't thinking as much as I think I should have been, or I wasn't looking for something I hadn't photographed before. The familiarity was great in the sense that I could capture a particular composition quickly. I wasn't struggling with the gear, but I wasn't necessarily thinking outside the box. The familiar box I'd built up is strong and it's sturdy, and that's not all bad, but it does need to be kept in check. Post-processing can become the same thing. For a seascape, I generally know what I want. White balance, black point, white point, add some clarity, a little bit of vibrance, vignette, on to the next. And it's formulaic. It's not all bad, of course, but there is a pattern here. But it's not all bad. You're refining your craft, the workflow, your style. It's all part of growing as a photographer. And I do think that familiarity overall is a good thing, but it's not without potential pitfalls. I especially notice my particular pattern of photography when I go out with other photographers or when I teach workshops. Others are creating excellent work, excellent photos, and they're finding framing and subjects that I simply didn't see. That's not uncommon in and of itself. We all see the world differently, but it's a immediate reminder that hey, your familiarity with a particular subject, that may be something you need to keep in check. Don't abandon the patterns. Break them from time to time. So how do I break the pattern, get out of my familiar comfort zone and keep the creativity pushing forward? I got a few things here that I'll share that hopefully you can use too to make sure you're keeping your photography fresh and you're staying inspired. First is to visit a new location. Just go somewhere different. It's very obvious in the sense of, I'm familiar with location A, I'll go to location B. But what a new location does, like one level beneath that, is it forces you to pay attention more. You need to look around. You don't know the area. You don't know what you might find. And it will force you to see differently, and you'll find new photos. I did this one recently. Instead of going to the ocean, I went to the harbor side in Coronado near San Diego. Left the tripod, just walked around handheld, and found a bunch of different subjects to photograph. And one of my favorite ones that came away was just, some table and chairs and, nothing fancy, but it was a nice little slice of life kind of travel type photo. Something that I don't normally photograph, but it let me, kind of get out of my own headspace, just putting myself in a different location so I wasn't trapped by the familiar, drawn to get that next seascape. The second one is to try new gear or to give yourself gear constraints. I'll lump these together. For the new gear, sometimes, when is it not? Budget is a factor. You can rent or borrow a lens. Doesn't have to be a purchase of something new. If you've got a shooting buddy, swap cameras. Each use each other's camera for the day. Don't mess up your friend's settings. You can agree on some ground rules. Swap your memory cards and then go off and try to shoot with somebody else's camera. And part of having to discover how that camera works, you tend to start seeing things a little differently. You could limit yourself to one of your own single lenses and don't use the zoom. If you've got a zoom lens, pick a focal length. Pick an aperture. Limit the. Give yourself constraints. Give yourself constraints and only shoot that way. This Coronado shoot I mentioned earlier, exactly what I did. 50 millimeter, did not change that, and I shot everything at f2.8. So those were my constraints, and for me that was quite a step outside of my familiar zone of very wide-angle lenses and small apertures. You could try a smartphone-only photo shoot. Another thing I did with one of my older cameras was convert it to infrared. So when I need to try something different, I can get out the IR camera, and even a familiar location now looks very different and I have to approach it differently. So try some new gear or give yourself some constraints on gear you already own. Third idea is to start a photo project. Give yourself a goal, give yourself a theme, and lace them together with a set of photographs. One project that I started, and technically speaking, I'm still doing it, it's not finished yet, is an ultra long exposure black and white project. I've earmarked 20 to 30 locations in my area, and I want multi-minute exposures. I'm going to process them only in black and white. And some of this project requires certain weather situations. So I have this project in the back of my mind all the time where if I'm tempted to just go back to that familiar pattern, go down to my favorite stretch of coast, grab a few photos, but the weather conditions are more conducive to this particular project that I have. There's a certain look I want in the sky, certain kind of clouds to be there. I'll see that happening and go, oh, I need to go back to this project again, and I'm going to do something different. And so that helps keep things nimble, keep things fresh. So think about a photo project and work that into your ongoing photographic journey. A fourth idea is to try a new genre of photography, or at least a new subgenre. So I'm a landscape photographer, and I have a heavy bias toward seascapes. Hey, I live in San Diego, the ocean's my thing, and I'm never going to give that up. A couple of years ago, I tried my hand at street photography, and I did not enjoy it. I did come away with some decent photos, but that was not something I would like to repeat. It did shake me up creatively. I did have some nice interactions with people, so that part, there was like pockets where it was enjoyable, but overall, I just felt like I was in a cold sweat the whole time. It was not a comfortable experience. I actually documented some of it from this outing on my YouTube channel. I'll dig up the link to that and put it in the show notes. That was a very drastic shift in genre. Something that works a little better for me personally is staying within the landscape genre of photography, but going to a subgenre, and it's somewhat connected with visiting new locations. So I'm still doing landscape work, but I'll go somewhere that's not the ocean. I might do an urban landscape, taking photos within a city or just within a town where there's, buildings and architecture. I still consider that part of the landscape genre. It's just more of an urban landscape. Something I'm actually doing tomorrow. It's Saturday as I record this, and tomorrow morning I'm getting up super early and heading inland to the local desert for some desert sunrises. That's not something I've done in, I think, a couple of years now. Take a trip to the mountains, go seek out a forest, find a lake, just go visit the next town over. Something that's different, but similar, different but similar. It sounds weird. It's in your overall genre of photography that you like, but it's a different subgenre. Maybe if you enjoy taking portraits, maybe you'd want to take portraits of pets or something like that, where shifting things up a little bit just to try something new and shake up your photography, get out of that familiar space to keep inspired. The last idea is to photograph with other people. I mentioned when I see the photos from students on workshops, those are really illuminating for me. The work that's been captured, it fills my creative bank, it reinvigorates me, and lets me think about different ways to view what is often a familiar scene. I mentioned, if you listen to episode 6 about harnessing the energy of others, this is connected there as well. Just get out with other people and don't just photograph near them. While you're photographing, talk, interact. What are you seeing? What are you capturing? Here's what I'm finding. Or talk about a struggle or so forth. Exchange ideas, because that will spark some creativity. And even if you're in a familiar setting, you'll get some unfamiliar advice. So overall, familiarity is good. It's valuable. I think it is an important part of growing as a photographer, and especially getting over the initial hump of understanding our cameras, just being comfortable with them, and certain aspects of photography can not be actively thought about. I get the camera, I'm instinctively knowing where dials are and those things. That's all great. When it comes to familiarity and you become too formulaic with compositions or with your processing or anything like that, keep it in check and try to break it up from time to time. Shake things up a little bit. Like the saying goes, everything in moderation, including moderation. There was an interesting article on DIY photography, and I'm going to do terrible with this photographer's name, Ole Henrik Skjelstad. He photographed the same cabin in winter over several years. And I thought it was an interesting connection where what struck me about the article is it's a nice bridge between a familiar setting and subject, but it was photographed in many different ways. And so it was a nice blend of things that are familiar, yet finding new ways or different compositions to capture this familiar subject. I'll share the link in the show notes. I thought it's a nice light read and some wonderful, beautiful photos of this red cabin in winter, surrounded by just white snow with some pretty dramatic ice and landscape around it. So have a look at that. And Ole, if you happen to be listening, wonderful, wonderful photos. I'd like to hear from you as well. What types of things do you do to shake up your photography, to break out of familiar patterns, or just to keep your creativity sparked? You can share your thoughts on this podcast at stopdownpodcast.com, or you can send in a message to me if you want to keep it private using the contact form on the website. A very big thank you to supporters on Patreon. It is your support that makes this podcast possible and helps thousands of photographers enjoy their photography. If you're interested in learning more about the Patreon community, check the show notes, and there's also a button on every page of stopdownpodcast.com where you can learn more about it. Well, that wraps up this week's episode. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you are in a familiar trap in your photography, I hope the tips here will help you shake out of that. Of course, only temporarily. Familiarity itself isn't a bad thing, but we do want to keep it in check. I'm working on another topic for next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please share it with a friend. Tell your friends about the Stop Down Photography podcast. You can also rate and review it on Apple Podcasts, and you can find episodes everywhere you get podcasts and on stopdownpodcast.com. Until next time, my name's Scott Davenport. Have fun.